Now baby, I'm the Ripper, your baby daddy's worst nightmare. Catch me by the Claire, I'll be right there. Niggas copy everything we say. Louis frames, eyes lower than my GPA. Riding and swerving, kush I'm blown. Goes wide, my trunk bump like Eddie Roll. I don't cake hoes, I never tip the stripper. I'm rich bitch, but you can call me Chief the Ripper. Shell toes, yes, BRPS. There's a man riding a horse on top of my chest. Polo fresh, I am Z-Man. I'll be slam dunking Tangeray shots with LeBron. Told niggas keep it Carmelo, okay?
How's it going, guys, and welcome back to another build video, this one on Ambassador Zane, whose name I graciously sourced from my Discord server. But this is a build that came from some experimentation trying to see if there was actually a situation where the spy would outdamage an executor in general gameplay. Of course, to clarify with that, I'm not saying there's never a reason to use the spy over the executor, even if it doesn't outdamage it. The spy does have some utility added on to it, but I did have a theory that it was possible, and through said experimentation, I was able to find it. But let's get on into things here and explain exactly how that was done. Starting out with our action stoves, we are using Mantis Cannon, mostly to proc various things. Of course, as I mentioned, this is also using the Spy class mod, so the Mantis Cannon is pretty much necessary to fully utilize the utility of it, but it does also just play into the general gameplay of this, having a lot of crit damage bonuses, meaning our Mantis Cannon will be doing a decent bit of damage. As is often the case with Mantis though, for the augments we're using No Way Out. This will pull enemies in, but the more important thing that this does is increase the damage taken by enemies hit with your cannon by 25%. This is a overall damage debuff, meaning it is nearly entirely multiplicative with every damage source. And with our secondary augment, Proliferation, just to give us a little bit more cannon charges so that we can spam it a little more often. And our secondary action still, of course, is Barrier, importantly running the all-rounder Anointment, making the barrier just that much more broken and giving full coverage. With the secondary augment really not being all that important, you could use either of these or none of them, but I usually just go for Charged Relay. Now talking about our actual stills, this is a very generic still spec, so I won't spend too much time on this. We've got Mana Focus, so that while we're spamming Mantis Cannon, we just have pinpoint accuracy. Headsman's Hand is very important, as this is a big source of crit damage, and since we aren't using the Executor, this is actually our only inbuilt source of crit damage. Commitment for a little bit more gun damage, which isn't super important, but that cooldown rate surely is, letting us again spam our Mantis Cannon just that much more often. 1 point into Fugitive, that way we can sprint and shoot at the same time, giving us a little bit more damage while also offering utility for moving around the field. Domino Effect for some reload speed and fire rate. Of course, Eraser. It's Eraser. While we aren't really abusing it super hard for this build does focus on hitting enemy crits, so anything behind it will be taking more damage. We then have one more point that we need to spend to move down the tree. I usually dump that into Sheer Will, just because it's a little bit more cooldown rate, and then 1 point into Our Man Flint. A very strong capstone, and especially so for this build, being an incredibly strong damage boost while aiming down sights, because this is V2 damage, which Zane does not have too much access to. Meaning while 25% may not seem like too much, in the context of the rest of his damage formula, it is quite a bit. Now to our second biggest tree, the blue tree, of course we start with Violent Speed and Violent Momentum, being Zane's bread and butter skills and pretty much making him function, giving movement speed and, importantly, a lot of damage the faster that you're moving. I usually go 5 out of 5 into Cool Hand because I find the reload speed to be a little bit better, but you could, instead of going 4 out of 5 into Violent Violence, go 5 out of 5 here and 4 out of 5 here, if you find that fire rate better suits the weapons that you're using. 1 point into Salvation, as this is lifesteal, and at the end game of BL3 you really don't need more than this. You're dealing so much damage that your health bar should be topped off as long as you're firing at an enemy. 1 point Seeing Red, of course. We only need 3 out of 5 into Playing Dirty, as that gives us a 42% chance of this to proc, and with how often we are activating kill skills, this will pretty much always be up. 1 point into Good Misfortune, just to help us keep Barrier up, and of course finishing off with our capstone, adding duration and effectiveness to all of our kill stills. Coming to our orange tree, 3 points into Prey Munitus to get that bigger mag size, 3 points into Borrowed Time just to help us extend the duration of Barrier. 1 point Donnybrook, this isn't really necessary. I tend to enjoy it though, just because that health regen can really come in clutch during a reload or just when you're not getting that salvation healing for whatever reason. And 1 point Gut Tape Mod just to help us out in case we splash ourselves. And finally Green Tree, where I put 5 points into Adrenaline just to get some more cooldown rate. Our shields are up pretty damn often as we are using Barrier, so once again this is just helping us spam that Mantis. And 5 out of 5 into Brain Freeze, letting us freeze enemies a little bit easier. This honestly isn't super necessary, but I find it's worth to put in here just to be able to get down to all-rounder. And now coming to our gear, starting out with our weapons, where we are using the wall barrier as active, accuracy is increased by 60% and critical hit damage is increased by 125% anointment on pretty much everything that we can. Worth mentioning with this anointment, if you're like myself and have been playing this game for a very long time, this anointment used to have some issues holding it back, but these are no longer present. It no longer has an internal cooldown, meaning that it can be used very effectively even with fully automatic weapons, and it persists perfectly fine between swapping weapons. This anointment is pretty much what makes the Spy better than the Executor in this situation, because this is giving us more crit damage than the Executor provides, and while the Executor does also provide cryo damage, the Spy is able to roll with 1 point into armor and flint, which is effectively making up for the loss of that cryo damage. Now keep in mind, I'm not saying that this build is stronger than your average Executor setups, this is just to offer more of an alternative and showcase that you can actually min-max for various other things that when min-maxed for may be better than the usual meta options. But this is a case where that works out incredibly well, and we do end up with a pretty strong and incredibly viable build. Now for our actual weapons, you can pretty much use just anything that you want, as Zane often thrives with, but a gun that I do specifically want to point out is of course the Smog, as this is a barrier focused build that also gets 2 out of 1 points into armor and flint, so we get a lot out of ADSing, where the Smog will then amp its shots while ADS'd, and with the barrier we won't be dropping that extra damage, as the barrier will prevent damage to the front-facing shield of the Smog. But some other really good options worth highlighting are the multi-tap, the Chaos, of course light shows, Chaosins, the redistributor, the torrent, OPQ system, needle gun, again anything that Zane usually uses very well is worth using here. Final thing worth mentioning with guns is that rocket launchers cannot actually roll with this anointment, and instead I'm using ASE splash on them. This does mean that for bossing, you will actually get more damage out of using an Executor or an Infiltrator, however you can still very easily kill most bosses without swapping if you don't feel like it. All boss kills that were shown earlier in the intro were done with the Spy. Under our shield, of course, this is current year, and in current year we have the Revolter, which is kind of just the best in slot shield for a vast majority of builds. And this is no different. However, if you don't want to use the Revolter, as I often find myself not wanting to do as well, the Old God is actually an incredibly viable alternative to the Revolter here, coming in actually surprisingly close in their clear times. Since we don't have that cryo damage bonus from the Executor, we don't really have any other elemental damage bonuses outside of the potential passives on our relic. This means that the 20% from the Old God is actually a pretty big boost, being almost entirely multiplicative. Again, with really the only other source of elemental damage coming from a passive roll. So of course, while the Revolter is still going to outperform it, the Old God isn't super far behind. With the Revolter, of course, you're going to want to run Ass Break just to always keep it up, but using the Old God, that does free up that anointment slot, allowing you to use another bonus element ASE. But the other shields I often carry around is just a Snowshoe, as I like to swamp to this if I decide to snipe, as it provides a lot of crowd control, and of course the Infernal Wish, which I'll swamp over to if I take on a boss that has a very large health bar of a single elemental damage type. Now for our grenade anointment, I'm using, of course, an ASE bonus element, usually running cryo on this as just a good all-around element, but it can be worth carrying around one of multiple element types. But keep in mind with this, if you are going to be using the Old God, make sure that your ASEs are different elements, as otherwise they will not stack with each other. For the grenade itself, I tend to just run a recurring hex, as it deals pretty good damage, applies a lot of elements, but since our only way of throwing grenades is a single point into duct tape mod, honestly the grenade that you choose doesn't really matter all that much. Just make sure it's something you're not going to kill yourself with. So for example, if you decide to use a piss grenade, make sure it's a level 1 piss. Of course, our class mod, as I've mentioned already, we are using a Spy, and of course again, very importantly, make sure that whatever Spy you're using, you have at least 1 point into Arm and Flint, and alongside that, as many points as you can get into Headsman's Hand. Unfortunately, 3 is the highest that I have, and it's on one that doesn't have super amazing passives, but I promise you, the passives are not as important as the still rolls are with this class mod for this build. In my testing, I was using an Executor that had pistol damage, and I was testing these against each other with a pistol. The Spy was still coming out on top, even though the Executor had a very beneficial passive on it. So you definitely want to get those still rolls before you really worry about passives, but if you're looking for passives, of course, weapon type damage, mag size, anything of that sort is going to do wonders. And for our relic, for Zane, we're going to be using an Icebreaker Victory Rush. This relic just synergizes very well with him, giving both V1 and V2 damage, pretty much just for playing the game as Zane likes to play it. For passives on this, mag size, elemental damage, splash damage, weapon type damage are all incredibly nice rolls. With with the other relic worth keeping around is a toboggan, as this is very helpful for bossing with Zane. But that's gonna about do it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed and maybe even learned a little something. If you did, definitely consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, all of that. Down in the description will be a link to my Twitch channel where you can follow to be notified of when I go live, and just below that is a link to my Discord server where you can come and join and hang out. But with that all being said, I hope to see you guys in the next one.